If you or your partner have bipolar disorder, should you be having children? This is a question I hear a lot throughout the community. If you poke around online, it's easy to see how strongly people feel about both sides of the argument. There are some who feel it's an act of cruelty to have a child, while many others think that that's just ridiculous. As always, I'm going to present information from both sides and then leave it up to you to decide what's best for your path. After all, who am I to tell you whether you should have kids or not? It's not anyone else's business but your own. As you watch this and do your research, remember I said that people are very divided on the subject. If you already feel strongly one way, it's really easy to find information that reflects your own biases. This is such an important choice, so I encourage all of you to really listen to both sides before coming to your own conclusion. This is one of the harder videos I've done considering how touchy the subject can be. I know that there's parents that have lost children due to suicide and others who have experienced the most horrific abuse imaginable in their families because of bipolar disorder. I understand this is a delicate topic for many of you, and I would never intentionally say something that would cause my viewers pain. Please know that there's only so much I can say in one video, and I'm not always right. If there's something that doesn't match with your personal experience, or if you feel like I left something out that's important, join the conversation in the comments below. Just keep it constructive and respectful, okay? All right, so let's jump into the good stuff. Now, this wouldn't be a debatable issue in the first place unless there were some good arguments on both sides. Let's start out with the common concerns people have and look at them from some different angles. I've had so many parents with bipolar contact me wondering if it was, quote, their fault that their child has bipolar disorder. It amazes me the level of guilt that some people felt because of this. I actually made an entire video that talks about this issue if it's something you struggle with as a parent. So most of the debate regarding having kids comes from research showing about a 10 to 25% chance genetically for children to develop the disorder if one parent has it, and around a 10 to 50% chance if both parents have it. Many studies have shown that those with bipolar disorder have at least one relative with severe depression or bipolar disorder. So that being said, it just makes sense that people are concerned about this. The first thought I had when I considered having a kid was, what if my kid ends up with bipolar disorder? I don't have kids at the moment, which means I can't share my own direct experience on this one. However, I spend so much time talking to those with bipolar disorder and feel confident that I can provide some really valuable information here. Something I pay close attention to is why someone has a certain belief instead of just focusing on what they believe. Most of the people I spoke with who made strong statements about not having kids were those who didn't have children yet, and a lot of them grew up in broken families with an environment of abuse, stigmas, or a lack of treatment and care. Rightfully so, their beliefs were based on personal experience, but each family is so different from the next. Their experience might not be yours, thus why it's so important to know why people make their decisions before you make your own, especially if your decision was influenced by someone else's views. Most of the people I spoke with who supported having kids already had a child, they were diagnosed, seeking treatment, and felt somewhat prepared. These are night and day differences in people's experience here. It's not a black and white issue. It's absolutely to each their own kind of thing. Something else I found interesting and can relate to myself was a woman describing a conversation she had with her best friend who happened to be her mom. Her mother broke down and said she was so sorry that she should have noticed what was happening when she was a kid and that she should have been aware that her daughter was susceptible to it. To this day, that conversation was a really heartbreaking memory for her. A conversation like that can leave a lasting impression on someone considering having a child. Something to consider in this situation is the lack of available information about mental illness in previous generations. Most of the older parents I spoke with stated that they would have had a lot less concern if they had the same information available to them decades ago. Another interesting perspective I saw was the difference between how men and women approach this topic. Women with bipolar disorder obviously have so much more to consider when having a child. Am I going to be able to take my meds while pregnant? Are my meds safe for nursing or the baby? Will the medication impact the baby's health? Will my symptoms get worse with all the biochemical changes associated with being pregnant? Will I experience postpartum depression or psychosis? I mean, just to name a few concerns. For most mothers with bipolar disorder, the trickiest time can be the postpartum period. Postpartum challenges aren't limited to just bipolar women, of course. However, women with bipolar disorder are at a much higher risk. It's so important for women with bipolar disorder to have some kind of plan in place with family and doctors in the event of psychosis. As recently as 10 years ago, the majority of doctors were advising women to not have children at all. Although this dated approach has changed quite a bit, there's still some tough considerations that women especially need to make. If you're a guy and you're all gung-ho about your bipolar wife having kids, please take a moment and really listen to her concerns. That doesn't mean that guys don't have their own unique concerns here too. If I'm the only one working, can I afford any potential care-related expenses that come up? If I'm a stay-at-home dad, will I have the support to take care of the child's needs if my partner is symptomatic? If I'm the bipolar one, will I be able to offer my wife support if she needs it and I'm symptomatic, and so on? There's just no blanket answer here. Each couple has to examine their own unique situation and make the best choice possible for them. Moving on, there's also a lot of couples who want to have children, but their immediate family, like parents and grandparents, are holistically against it. Couples hear things like, you shouldn't have kids, you're going to ruin your life, your child is going to suffer, etc. Those are hard things to hear from your own parents. While they might have some valid concerns, it's important to dig a little deeper into exactly why some parents feel this way. Parents try so hard to prevent us from experiencing some of the same struggles and perceived mistakes that they made. Raising a bipolar child can be challenging, to say the least. I mean, you can ask my parents about that one. At the same time, though, my life couldn't be more different from my parents. Sure, there are some strong life similarities because they're my tribe, so to speak, but we're talking about raising a child in two very different times. The amount of information, support, treatment options, and public understanding of mental illness just wasn't the same a generation ago. My parents have mentioned countless times how different things would have been if they had just the same information or care while raising me. Like so many parents, they just didn't know what was going on. If I had a child, I'd have an entirely different set of tools to work with than my parents did, including firsthand experience of living with and managing my bipolar disorder. So that addresses one aspect of a parent's concern, but what if I was drinking a lot, or using meth and other drugs, or hadn't had a stable job in years, maybe moved to a new town every 6 months, just met someone a few months ago and want to have kids already, or made the decision to be a parent when I was manic? That's a whole different set of concerns, and why I emphasize how important it is to understand why someone believes there's a concern. If the people you care about have valid concerns, at least hear them out. Also remember that we don't always have the best track record for making clear decisions when we're symptomatic. And this is probably one of the biggest life decisions you're ever going to make, so please take your time with it, even if you think you're 1,000% sure. Timing can be everything to achieve a good outcome talking about something this important. If you, or especially your loved ones, have concerns, be patient and maybe wait to discuss them when you're more or less stable. I know it's hard to sit on something this important when you want clarity, but this topic is just too important to rush. Another issue I ran into while researching this topic was those that didn't really have a choice. Maybe they became pregnant while manic and hypersexual, or maybe they aren't married and just didn't expect it. I mean, condoms break all the time. Situations like that can add a whole different set of concerns to discuss. I've even had parents contact me who were irate that their bipolar son or daughter decided to have children, and they basically wanted my help to talk them out of it. It's simply not my place to do that. If someone makes the full-hearted choice to have kids, it's really their choice. That doesn't mean it isn't complicated, though. Let's say your child still lives at home and decides to have a kid. That could financially and emotionally impact others beyond just the pregnant couple. In that case, maybe there are some boundaries that need to be set, but try to keep those separate from your feelings about if they should have a child in the first place. If your son or daughter has already made the choice to have a child, the thing that'll make the most difference in their lives at that point, and more importantly the child's life, is to offer support and education. Focus on what is in your circle of influence and try to do it with love. Moving on, there's still a lot of things to think about after a child is born. We're so lucky to live in the information age. Like I mentioned earlier, so many of the older parents I talked to said that things would have been completely different if they'd only knew what was going on. With all of the information available, and especially if you have personal experience living with bipolar disorder, just imagine the impact that you could make in a child's life, if they even end up with bipolar disorder. We're starting to see a whole new generation of adults who are seeking treatment and living a very fulfilling life. Not everyone, of course, but we really have come a long way. Knowing a lot about bipolar disorder and what to expect is just one component here, though. There's still so many other things to consider. First and foremost is care. Do you live in an area where you have access to good doctors, therapists, and support? If so, can you afford those services long term? If you lose a job, would you still qualify for assistance to keep those services going? Many kids with bipolar disorder can also have a hard time in school or socializing. Taking a good look at the education system where you live is also a good idea. Not all schools have the best programs for special needs kids, if that's something you end up needing, like my parents did. Something else you can do that made a huge impact in my life is to get your kids involved in a mindful activity like karate. The martial arts can help with socializing, discipline, confidence, motor skills, and so much more. It can provide them with an outlet for their energy, keep them active in the digital age. I mean, it goes on and on. I can't even imagine what my life would have been like, and my parents, if I wasn't exposed to something like karate. As many of you know, I ran chains of karate schools for years, and the impact my programs made on troubled kids was unlike anything me or the parents had ever seen. It might not be for every kid, but if they take to an activity like this, it can be a long-term, life-changing investment. Gymnastics is another good one. Basically, anything that focuses on mindful personal development. Some of that can be achieved through team sports, but it's just not quite the same as those other activities. So moving on, and another thing I wanted to touch on is this. Please don't do this alone. I know bipolar disorder can be very consuming for those in a caretaker role, and it's really important to have your own counselor or support. It's so easy to get lost in taking care of someone that you love, and parents can just be amazingly selfless in that way. If you're struggling a lot yourself, it's going to make it a lot harder to offer quality support to someone else. Books and videos are great, but nothing beats that interaction with another human being. I have regular counseling appointments even if I don't have anything specific to talk about. It's not that you need counseling because you have specific issues. It's more about having someone on the outside who specializes in seeing things differently than we do, to get some fresh ideas and to have some kind of direction. There's no manual for raising a child with bipolar disorder, or any child for that matter. It's funny how people assume that counseling is just for people with issues, and it's really not. It's like having an old, wise best friend that gives you advice just to make life a little easier. Those of us with bipolar disorder know the dark places that our minds can go to when we aren't well. It can feel so incredibly real. We feel worthless and second-guess everything in our lives. We might feel overwhelmed and very uncomfortable in general. So imagine if a woman is going through a strong depressive episode and then add all the biochemical changes associated with pregnancy on top of that. Wow, I mean, that's a lot, and sometimes it's just too much. If you're the family or partner of someone expecting and hear statements like, "I'm going to be a horrible mother," "I'm unfit to be a parent," "I hate my life," or things like that, pay attention to that. It probably means your partner is suffering, doesn't know why, and needs some extra love and support. If there's nothing you can say to make a difference at the time, just being with them can make a huge difference. Sometimes a hug and just not being alone can accomplish a lot more than words can. It goes without saying, but if suicide is mentioned, that has to be taken so seriously. You might assume that your depressed partner would never actually go through with it, but keep in mind that we're adding a lot of additional stresses and unknowns to the equation when pregnancy is involved. Don't take any chances, because there's more than one life at stake here. I know this video is getting a bit long, but there's just so much to be said about something this important. I'm sure there's a lot of things I left out, but here's the thing. There are so many different types of bipolar disorder, levels of severity, and each person's circumstances are just as unique as the next. There's no way with my limited worldly experience, or anyone's for that matter, that we could address all of the concerns people have in just one video. I'm also a guy, and I respect that there's many things that I'm just not qualified to talk about because I haven't experienced them myself. My goal in making this video is not to take sides or convince anyone of anything. It's just not my place to do that. My hope is that I mentioned maybe just one thing that you hadn't thought about or considered yet. That's what this whole channel is all about. My job is to plant seeds and leave it up to all the polar warriors out there to decide how, when, and where they cultivate those seeds. So I've been getting some incredible messages and questions from the Polar Warrior community. I have learned so much from listening to all of you, and I'm sure there's still many of you with questions you might have not found a satisfying answer for yet. Well, let's chat. I've included a link at the top of all my video descriptions where you can contact me directly anytime you want on Patreon. It's so important to me that I have your support. There's such a need for free resources like my channel, and most people don't realize how much time I donate to doing this. It's a lot, but I can't imagine doing anything else. This is my purpose, and I'm asking your help to keep a good thing going for many years to come. See you guys next time for another Polar Warrior video.